All right, welcome to the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative webinar series. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're spending this little bit of time with us. So we are going to have a little bit different of an intro. So the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative, for those who don't know, is a fantastic group of folks working across prairies, across state lines, and across agencies to basically try to figure out how in the heck are we gonna do better at building prairie back. And so in order to do that, we need databases, we need monitoring protocols, and we need help. We need partnership. We need to work with each other to figure this out. So a couple webinar tips. We have set this webinar so that you're free. You can unmute yourself, you can mute yourself, you can do all the things. So we're gonna ask that everybody go ahead and make sure that you're muted. I can go through and mute all of you, which I'm about to do. So then everybody's just muted for right now, which is good. And then we won't hear the background noise so that everybody makes sure that they get shocked. If you need a snack, if you need to get up during this webinar, we're not policing what you do. You do what you need. We're just here to teach you, and hopefully you can learn something. And you will learn something, because if you don't learn something from Pauline and Amanda and Andy, you might be doing this day the wrong way. So you definitely will learn something from them. So before I explain a little bit more about what the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative is, we just want to take a moment and acknowledge some things that have been happening and many of us have been feeling, both in Minnesota and then just across our Prairie region. So I have the sad, I guess, I don't know, the honor or the sad honor. I'm trying to advance the slide and it won't let me do it. So unfortunately, this past week, we lost a fellow friend in conservation. And part of what we're doing at the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative is we're really partnering to try to figure out how we can do, like I said, build prairie back better. And part of that partnership is people. So it's you that's on the call today, and it's just all of us working together. And so I'm going to read something that we wrote because we wanted to take a moment and acknowledge the passing of our dear friend and fellow conservationist, Marty Baker. So I might get emotional while I read it, which is why I had to write it. I know most of you are used to me just riffing and being able to just kind of say all the things. But for this one, I had to read it, or else I think I would just be a puddle of tears. But we wanted to take a moment to honor Marty and his legacy and his commitment to the prairie. And I'm just really appreciative of Amanda and Pauline and Andy for giving us this time and exercising this courtesy so that we could just take a moment here. So I'm going to read a little bit. When you work in conservation, you're not just working with coworkers, you're working within a community. And when a member of that community dies, you mourn not just the loss of a wonderful person, but also the loss of all the good they were doing for conservation, for the land, and for the prairie. Marty was part of my community. He was part of our prairie community. If you drive across southern Minnesota from Windham to the South Dakota border and find yourself on a waterfowl production area with reconstructed prairie, that prairie was likely planted by Marty Baker. Marty worked out of the Windham Wetland Management District for the past 30 years, and he started at the Morris Wetland Management District before that. So his career totaled 37 years, 37 years committed and dedicated to the prairie. And many of you may have known him. So earlier this week, so many of us attended the viewing and funeral. As you entered the room to pay your respects, hanging there was Marty's work shirt, badge in place, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service logo prominently displayed. The only thing missing was a smile and his rancher-style sun hat. His shirt was placed next to a bunch of cut prairie plants, complete with little clipped-in butterflies and birds. Next to a display of prairie wildflowers from the Windham Wetland Management District staff were Marty's fire helmet and work gloves, placed with care and conviction that these badges of service are resting now. The thousands of acres of prairie that they cared for, living on as a testament to the man who dedicated his life to them. Marty was a lifelong learner, always curious and asking questions, even though he knew more about the land and his pinky finger than most of us know in our entire being. At the viewing, I met his wife Judy and his two sons, Bennett and Andrew. I had never met Judy before, but when I introduced myself and expressed my sorrow at her loss and the loss of my friend, she pulled me across the COVID rope into the biggest hug I've ever received all year and thanked me. She thanked me because we recorded Marty's voice for her to have forever. As Judy was hugging me, she asked me if we could share his voice and wisdom with others. And because Judy asked me to, and I got the impression pretty quickly that you do what Judy asked you to do, I'm sharing with you a place where you can go and hear his voice. Sit with him one more time and try to learn a little bit about a lifetime of dedication to the prairie from my friend, Marty Baker. Marty, we're taking this moment to honor you now as a small tribute while we work on continuing your legacy of finding joy in life and always being ready to learn. We honor your commitment to the prairie, knowing it will take many of us to match your contribution. And because Marty would want us to, he would want the lifelong journey of learning to continue, right? So again, this is what the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative is all about. We're collaborating, we're partnering, we're learning from each other, and we're about to learn from three of the greats. And so I'm going to turn it over to Pauline and Amanda and Andy so they can help us keep knowing what we need to know so that we can make sure that Marty's legacy continues forever and ever.
Okay. Thank you, Megan. It's almost hard for me to follow. This is that beautiful tribute. So do you see my slide?
Not yet.
Okay, let me know when you see it and then I'll be able to start.
I can see it. It's up there.
All right. Okay, so Prairie. Prairie Reconstruction, which is about planting prairies, is a black box. It's a riddle of sorts. There's usually a lot of uncertainty about what will happen when you plant a species-rich mix on land that hasn't been a prairie for really a long time. We put a lot of resources into it, but what exactly happens in a year, in 3 years, or 10 years? We don't really know. So one way that we learn is to get out in the field, kick the toe of your shoe around, kick the dirt around with some colleagues and talk about what we see, what we learned in other situations, and share our successes and failures. And we're big believers in these kind of field days in the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative. Whoops, but to be able to learn what works and what doesn't, and what consistently gets a high quality result, we recognize that we also need a systematic approach to learning. And so we have developed a monitoring framework. And this is paired with a database, which you are going to hear about a little bit later from Amanda and Andy. The two parts of the framework, protocol framework, include a meandering walk and nested plots to answer separate but related questions. And if you look down at the bottom of your slide in the center, that's the cover of the National Protocol Framework for Monitoring Vegetation in Prairie Reconstructions. And think of it as your guidebook, because this will tell you everything, how to do everything that we're talking about in much greater detail, and answer some questions that you're probably going to have as a result of just seeing what it is that we're presenting. So where do we do it? Where do we have the prairie, where do we do these this monitoring protocol? Well, this method has broad geographic applicability, and currently we have participants in the Upper Midwest and tallgrass prairie, and in the mixed grass prairie area. People on our advisory team are dotted across this geographic area as well. The sample unit for our monitoring protocol is a seed mix area, meaning a place, like let's say a unit, maybe it's a management unit, where you plant all the same seed mix. Now, if you have a second seed mix that you plant next to the one that you're thinking about monitoring, you need to monitor that as a separate seed mix, because it's apples and oranges, those two seed mixes, the way they're going to develop and respond. This can be used on prairie remnants, but it's designed for prairie reconstruction, but you could use it on prairie remnants, and I know people are already doing that. If you want to use it for savanna and woodland, just say no, because it doesn't have anything that is relates to the woody component. But just as a side note, there is a savanna monitoring protocol coming up. I'm leading that effort with others, and hopefully we'll have that ready for you soon. But that's another story. Now, let's see here. When should we monitor? So you want to monitor.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick. You might need to turn off your video because the slides are having a little bit of a lag. And if you turn your video off, it might help, might just help Microsoft at its life.
All right, let me see what I can do here. If I can. Okay. All right, so we are at the when. When do we monitor? And you know, the trick here is figuring out when peak species expression is happening. We want to maximize that time, that moment in the year, if you're only going to be monitoring once, that you can get the biggest bang for your buck. So before the early season species become unidentifiable, and after the late season species are well developed enough to be able to identify. And so, you know, I think you can also think about it not so much in a season or in a month. Here around Iowa, central Iowa, where I am, I would normally think of that as being in early to maybe mid-June. But the seasons can be very warm early or very cold early, which can shift that. So you might want to use a phenological cue, for example, sort of when the sedges are still identifiable, but the asters are coming on. And we recognize that you won't be able to identify everything. There's tips for how to maximize that in the document. Okay. So then why? We want to know, what do we monitor? We want to know if planted species showed up in the field. That's a pretty important thing when you plant a prairie. Did it work? That's one measure of success. Another one is the degree to which invasive species are present and expanding or contracting their population size. We want to know if we're progressing towards our unique management goals. My management goals might be different than yours. And so are we moving towards our unique monitoring or management goals? The PRI monitoring framework allows us to compare the degree of success among seed mixes, for example, or planting methods. Does the drilling in the spring, planting seeds with a drill in the spring, yield the same results as broadcast seeding in the fall? Those are all important questions to us, and it allows us to understand what works most consistently. Ultimately, monitoring allows managers to see how actions affect an individual site through time and compare results across a broad geographic region. So how do we do the monitoring? We'll start with the meandering walk. And this technique focuses on species richness. There are other kinds of pieces that we put in there that are just strictly designed to help managers understand situations on their own field, like how dense is an invasive species out in the field, and it's very qualitative. But the main thing we're looking for here, the thing that we're focusing on, is species richness. So this is a botanist walk. If you look at the little map on the lower right-hand side, you'll see there's a kind of a blue area and a purple area, and this is representing two different moisture types. So we do stratify by soil moisture type, and if you have, for example, a wet place in the same seed mix area as a mesic chunk, so you planted the same seed mix over the whole area, then you will monitor those two places, those two pieces independently. Keep the data separate. because it confounds the data if you mix those two pieces. The meandering walk is very much a botanist-directed walk, relying on the expertise and the insights that botanist has. You might see a patch of darker vegetation or kind of off over that hill, and you know that probably means you're going to see some different species there, or maybe you know there's a little spring over on this one slope and you want to go there. So there's insights, there's things that you can bring from looking at a map so that you know some of the features of your planting site. But it relies on the expertise of the person doing the work. And if a single seed mix, we mentioned that there's dry, mesic, and wet. This is a relatively quick monitoring method with some additional observations that are there, as I mentioned. And we think that this is something that you could do annually. Now I'm moving on to the nested plots. And then the nested plots are a little different beast. These are also stratified by soil moisture type, but they're located in a systematic grid. So you see in the lower right-hand corner of this slide, there are several points. You also see the blue and the purple. Those represent the two soil moisture types that we are stratifying by. And there is a systematic grid that is overlaid on the map so that you know where your points are, and you navigate to those points, and then you lay your frame down, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And there is a tool that was developed by PRI that you can get access to by looking again at that little guidebook that I mentioned earlier. And there's other ways of doing that. If you have another way you prefer to do it, that's fine too. The nested plot method relies on a frame and is amenable to statistical analysis. It takes the same amount of skill as the meandering walk, but it's more time intensive. And we think maybe after the first 1 to 3 years, if that's kind of a time when things change quite a lot, you might not need to monitor more than every 3 or 5 years, depending on your objectives. So if you look at that diagram at the center bottom of my slide, you'll see the frame. The left half of that kind of represents the frame. And so the dimensions of the frame are 1/2 meter by 1 meter. So that's 1/2 square meter in area. But the center, if you look at that center blue line, at one point while we're monitoring, we'll just leave that one side touching the ground and then flip the entire frame over to the right where it says E. That dotted line represents that second monitoring piece. And when we flip it and monitor there, then it makes our monitoring, our sampling area be 1 square meter. Why do we do it like this? We know that research has demonstrated that I need a longer, narrower monitoring or plot configuration yields more species than a square one. So we're just taking advantage of that knowledge and in this protocol. So we're going to get into the nitty-gritty a little bit here and show you the frame and how it works and how we use it. My next slide here is just shows you the frame itself. And down in the lower center, when this comes up on your screen, you will see a PVC frame. So it's easy to build. The instructions are in the monitoring framework. And there's a division down the middle, and there's a couple of little rods in there. They're just very heavy wire that go through a couple of drilled holes on each side of that, in the middle part of that frame and on the end. So that just creates different sizes of partitions. So this is our 1/2 square meter frame. And now I show you these other pictures here because when you're going out into the field and you're laying this down on the ground, it's sometimes hard, especially if the vegetation is tall, to be able to just lay it flat down and have it be something that is easy to get in there. So if you take the long end off of the frame and those two little short bars, you can just slide it right into the vegetation. It just threads right through it, and it works pretty slick. So that's how that works. Once you get that back in there, down on the ground where you need it to be, and your point would be in the lower right-hand corner of this frame. That's where your sampling point is. Then you're good to go. So now I'm going to walk you through a hypothetical sampling situation to demonstrate how the monitoring works. The nested plot is depends on frequency data to allow calculation of an index of density. The beauty of this is that there's no cover estimates needed, reducing observer error, the time to read the plot, and it reduces mental fatigue, at least in my experience. The only thing we need to record is if a species occurred, or if a species occurred, and the size of compartment that it was first observed in. And I'll get into that a little bit more as I go through the next slides. Notice the different size compartments here. Compartment A is half the size of A and B combined. And so then if we record species in compartment A, that gives us a discrete set of data for that size compartment. But then if we want to double that and look statistically at a larger piece, we combine A and B. We don't have to resample A because we've already done that. So we only sample what's in B. But the data can be analyzed as the block, which is A plus B. Then that continues through the different size compartments. A and B are doubled by adding compartment C, and so on. Hopefully this will become more understandable as we go through this sequence of demonstrations on how you record data. So now I'm showing a slide that has those same compartments, and we're going to go through monitoring. This is a very weird and wonderful prairie that we are in. There's nothing very weedy in there, or even very common. We go out to plot. We're in plot 1. This is the first plot we're monitoring. And so we look at compartment A, and we have 2 stems of pale purple coneflower. It doesn't matter how many stems. All we need to do is note that it's there. It's frequency only. So we put down on our data sheet Echinacea pallida in compartment A. Next, we're going to compartment B. And in this one, the only thing we find is Gentiana puberulenta, downy gentian. And so we write that species down and indicate that it was found in compartment B. Next, we go to compartment C, which again doubles the area of A and B. And we see 2 species in compartment C. And so we write down prairie drop seeds, Parabolus heterolepis, and C to indicate it's in that compartment. We do not write down Echinacea pallida, because if we wanted to analyze this whole size class, which is A, B, and C, that becomes one piece of information that we can analyze. We wouldn't want to count Echinacea pallida in A and then count it again in C, because it's redundant. In D, we see a couple of prairie drop seeds and a pale purple coneflower. Nothing to record. A lot easier than doing the cover data, isn't it? So then we go to compartment E. And the way we get there, remember, is that we leave that right end of the short end of the frame on the ground and flip it over. And now we're in the largest compartment. And here we see two new species. One of them is prairie lily, and one of them is shooting star. So we write down Lilium philadelphicum and Dodecatheon media in the appropriate places and indicate that it was in compartment E. Now, one of the things that happens when you record these data is that we can begin to tell which are the more rare and which are the more common species. If we find something that just almost doesn't show up at all, it only comes up when we have like the largest frame, the largest size area, or only rarely shows up in any other compartment, then that's a pretty rare species. Because it's just not, if we find one that's just popping up in A, the very smallest compartment all the time, let's say big blue stem, it's just kind of everywhere. And it's not like it's only in A, it's probably in all of those compartments, but if it's showing up in the smallest of the compartments pretty consistently, then we know that's a really common species. And so that's another way to think about this. The slide I'm showing now is a summary slide that gives you the overview of the slide, the way we recorded the data for that particular scenario, and then the area of the subplot. So compartment A is a 16th meter. A and B combined is an 1/8 meter. A, B, and C, that's half of the frame size, which is a 1/2 meter. So that's a 1/4 meter. And then A, B, C, and D is a 1/2 meter, of course. And then when we turn that frame over, we're up to a full meter squared. So now I'm going to hand this off to Amanda to talk about the database.
Okay, thank you, Pauline. Let me see. Oops, share. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yep, we got it.
Great. Okay, so now you've successfully completed your monitoring. So Pauline stepped through what occurs at one of those little monitoring dots, that grid of dots, and depending on the size of your field, according to our protocol and some power analyses that we had done, you would have between 10 and 40 grid points where you'd monitor in each seed mix area. So you've gone through all, say, 40 of your points, you've collected all the data, and so now what? You want to try to make sense of what you've been documenting, and you want to put it into context. I want to talk for just a couple of minutes about the protocol framework that Pauline talked about. I think Megan or Paul put it into the chat earlier, and it's also, you can find it, a link to it from our website. And this document, it provides more detail about implementing those methods that Pauline described. So it'll give a lot of background that's mostly contained in 2 SOPs toward the end of the document. But it also provides guidance about kinds of questions that can be answered by each method, the kinds of analyses that are appropriate, some background information, the rationale behind the sampling design, example data sheets, a variety of things. And, finally, there's prompts throughout the document that are meant to help you develop a monitoring plan for your own site. So in other words, you take this framework, which is kind of a general thing, and you say, well, I'm going to, apply it to these specific sites within my area, and this is why, that kind of thing. So I encourage you to look at the full document. Hopefully it's a good resource for everybody to use, and it certainly provides the details the nuts and bolts about implementing the monitoring methods that Pauline discussed. Okay, so again, we're at the point, like if you look at the maroon circle on this slide, you've collected your field monitoring data, you want to make sense of it. You can certainly use the monitoring data by itself and, you know, take the temperature of your site. You can look at trends over time, you know, compare sites. But to really fully interpret the data, we need context. And that's represented by the circles on the left, the blue and green and purple. You know, what happened historically? What are the characteristics of the site itself? How is it planted? What has the ongoing management been? You know, when we have access to those pieces of information, that's when we can start to make those connections and better understand our results. So now you could compare what you saw during the vegetation monitoring to what you knew you had planted. Or you can compare, like maybe you did a certain management last year, burned at a certain time of year, for example, intending to have a certain result, and you can, through the vegetation monitoring, you can kind of compare that to your mental model, like have I seen in the field what I expected to happen based on what the management had been? So, you know, to really understand what you're seeing in the vegetation as it's expressed that year, you need some of this context. And then furthermore, you know, if lots of people have collected similar data in a similar way about the planting and the ongoing management and have also done monitoring, then, you know, as a community, we can start to understand these reconstruction processes in a bigger, more thorough way. And I do want to emphasize here that, you know, it's critical not just to have, say, the seed mix or whether it was drilled or broadcast, but also that ongoing management that occurs every year. And so to that end, as some of you know, we've been working on a Prairie Reconstruction database for several years that encompasses both parts of this, both the planting and management part and the monitoring. And, you know, it had gone through a couple of iterations of testing and revision, and it was in really good shape. And then for a variety of reasons, we had to take it from the platform where we originally developed and move it to a new platform. And unfortunately, that process has taken a fair amount of time, and there have been a number of technical hurdles to overcome. But the good part about the new platform is that it is ArcGIS Online, and so it has geographic information built in, which was previously lacking in our database. And we're also able to develop mobile apps to facilitate electronic data entry directly from the field. And Andy Allstat, who is our U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Regional Data Manager, he's going to talk to you for a few minutes about a little more about the status of the database and the Survey 123 apps, and I'll just let Andy take over from there.
Thank you, Amanda. So I'll share my screen. All right, so like Amanda said, we are shifting away from what was an old version of SharePoint, and while we did have it working well, there were a lot of awkward things about it. One of the probably the most important of which was that it did not really hold spatial data. We are shifting to ArcGIS Online, which many of you probably already use in your own agencies, even if you're not with the Fish and Wildlife Service. So hopefully it'll be familiar to many of you, and for the rest of you, a little bit of this will sound complicated, but I promise you, once you get in the field and are doing the monitoring, it's actually pretty straightforward. So the database will be hosted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, again on ArcGIS Online, and then we obviously maintain backups and stuff like that as well. We will have the geodatabase, that's the official database, it'll hold the information. We will also have Survey 123 data entry, or Alternatively, Esri just keeps coming out with new data entry tools, so we will see which one works best even in the next month before the field season. So Survey 123 or similar, and that allows you to just enter data from your iPad or your phone or whatever. If you are with an agency, we will probably need to develop a data sharing agreement long-term to formalize this relationship. We are a federal agency, and as a federal agency, we are subject to transparency laws and things like that. So if we're hosting your data, we need to make sure that the relevant people in your agency know that it could potentially be shared with the public in a court case, or these agreements often can restrict some of that access as well. So that's a longer term thing. Partners will be able to access this database. Ideally, if you have an ArcGIS Online account already through your own agency, we will just be able to have you access it through that. Otherwise, we can get you a collaborator account, which is free, but there is a burden of managing all of those individual collaborator accounts. And again, this will be a centralized database. That means that I can do the data management stuff. I can do all the boring stuff while you guys play in the Prairie, and we can develop a common set of tools to spit out reports and things like that, rather than each person having to develop their own reporting tools or analysis tools and things like that. So a major pro of this is that this is not SharePoint. The old version of SharePoint that this was previously in, we had lots of problems with getting people to be able to log in and stuff like that. This simplifies that process. We can natively hold spatial data, and this could be important in, we're gathering data to be a large data set that researchers will hopefully be interested in. But let's say a researcher 5 years from now wants to know, how far each nested plot was from a body of water or something like that. With the spatial data, they can go back and calculate those things, whereas previously they would have had to do some workarounds. The spatial data also allows us to answer some of the questions in the database for you, like the questions about soil. We can pull automatically from NRCS rather than you filling them in. And we can have spatially detailed management actions, meaning on other projects that are similar to this, sometimes we record management actions by management unit. And I think we all know that our management actions don't actually occur at the unit level in many cases. So you don't know which points were actually treated and which were not. Here we can either do it the old way, or you can actually draw the shape of where your burn went in the database. There are some downsides. One is that we lose the granular control over permissions, meaning that somebody could accidentally delete all the data if we didn't take precautions, for example. So a lot of the next few slides are to control that sort of thing. And then, like I mentioned, the user management is still an issue. We hope that you can use your existing accounts in many cases. Otherwise, we can get you collaborator accounts. So if you have your own ArcGIS Online account, we have done this with a few agencies already. If you go to your profile and go to my settings, this selection right here, and then go to profile visibility and set it to everyone, then I can find you and add you to our group, again, using your existing account rather than you having to have two different accounts. So it's easy, you just got to flip one setting. This works for most agencies that have some back-end server settings kind of set up properly for this. Minnesota DNR, I'm still working with your IT folks. They seem to be pretty strict, so we'll see if we can get you in here. Otherwise, we'll do the collaborator accounts. Okay, so like Amanda said, there are two parts of the database. There's the first part, which is kind of the general organizational information, your restoration information, and then your management actions. So let's say you have a new set of plantings. We will have a template for you to fill in that has your spatial data and the attributes that go along with it. In a perfect world, some of your data, at least your site level data, would come from some authoritative source, like DNR or the Fish and Wildlife Service have our realty layers we can pull from in many cases. Once you have that ready, you're going to send it to the data manager, which would be me or Amanda. We will periodically review it and do some quick quality control to make sure everything looks okay. And then we import it to this official database. And this official database is read only. That way it's protected from accidentally deleting everything. So, and similarly, if you have management actions, we will have a Survey123 app for your phone where you can either enter it by planting unit or seed mix area, or you can actually draw the shape in there. And again, Amanda or I will import it so that no one is accidentally messing with the official database. So now you have all that kind of basic data in there, and you're going out to monitor. So you will go out, you can use Survey123 or similar tools that Esri offers to collect your data. And I'll show you one of those real quick in a minute. Either at the end of the day or maybe at the end of the field season, you should review your data and look for anything weird. Once you hit yes on that, then we will migrate that data to the official database where it will live happily forever. I know some of you like paper data sheets still, and I don't disagree. If you want to continue to use paper data sheets, we will offer an Excel template that you can enter your data sheets into, and then we will have a script that will pull the data from the Excel into the official database as well. So we're not forcing you to use Survey123 or anything like that, but I would at least give it a try. And now I'll switch. So I'm just going to show you what I have so far. It's definitely not final, but we're getting close. So here's some information for Glacial Ridge National Wildlife Refuge. The site level is highlighted in yellow. The planting units are in blue, and then each of these little shaded areas is a seed mix planting. Hey, can you guys see my ArcGIS on or
yes,
ArcGIS Pro now?
Yep, and we can see the little hand pointing.
Oh, great. So you can tell I make ugly maps. I will make sure that the final maps have a real GIS person review them for colors and stuff. But like I said, we can do some of the soil stuff for you now that we have spatial data. So I have also pulled the NRCS soil data here. This is all of the soil data. And then PRI actually uses a much simpler version of the soil data. And it's being slow. So again, the topography here makes it look complicated, but there's actually only 3 colors here. This is the actual PRI soil drainage classes that you would use to set up your sampling, and then if you're doing the meandering walk, you kind of stick to one drainage class at a time. So this is kind of the everything map. We can also have a map of a meandering walk, and I think that we will be able to actually track your meandering walk as you go. I need to check out the new tools that Esri is offering for that. Otherwise, it'll be through Survey123, which you will record species as you go, but you wouldn't get this nice track necessarily of where you walked. And then we have a third map. I just made up some points here for a nested plot. So each of these would be a nested plot. You would click on this, a pop-up would come up, and with a link to Survey123, which you would then fill in your survey data. So I will switch to that real quick. And here's just an example of what the survey would look like. If you clicked from the map, the site name, planting unit, and seed mix area would be filled in for you. survey date, you can just click it and it'll take your date and time that you did this, type in your name, other observers, and then you can go through each of the plots in your seed mix area and record. Pauline is making fun of me because there's a bunch of trees in here. This isn't the official species list. But you just go through and you pick the species and which plot you found it in first. So plot A was the smallest one. Then you're in plot B and so on. And again, this list could potentially get long. When we import the data to the real database, if you accidentally included the species in A and then forgot and include it in D as well, we can filter out the extra record. So you'd do that, you'd record all your species, and for your first nested plot, you hit plus, and then you go to your second nested plot. And then at the end of your day, you just hit this little submit button down here, and it would go into our database, to our draft database. And just one more thing on the demo, like this is from the browser. This is the same exact data. You can see that you can see it a lot of different ways. You can enter data a lot of different ways. This will give us flexibility in offering you guys tools that are easy to use. And the data can be used to report in many ways, like with dashboards to show kind of live data reports and things like that as well. So the current status, I have draft PRI database built. The management action stuff I still have to add on. That's what's missing still. I have draft monitoring data and data collection tools built, and they will be reviewed by the database team in the near future. And the aim is to have these ready for monitoring season. One thing I could use for you, if you want to send me a chat or something, I could use more test data to put in here. So if you have data you know is going to be in the PRI database at some point, I would love to have it, and I will put it in for you just to test out my data structures. After we have all that set, the PRI team will continue to develop reports and things like that. And then once they have an idea of what they want those to look like, I can build them into this database as well. I will also mention that the nested plot point selection tool will also be built in here as well. So it'll kind of all be in one spot. And I think that's it for me, Amanda.
All right. Thank you, Andy.
Do you want it back, or do you just want me to keep sharing?
I'll just steal it.
Okay.
So give me just one more sec. Okay, so I just wanted to take a couple of minutes and wrap up. Like I said, thank you, Andy. That's really exciting, tremendous work going on there. So when we're starting to think, getting back to how Pauline introduced us, when we're starting to think about unraveling this riddle of prairie reconstruction outcomes and how how we make sense of what we see. We started with a certain seed mix and a planting effort that occurred at a certain time. We had management action along the time, and we've kept details we've kept track of the details of each of those management actions. And we've come along and done some monitoring. And PRI monitoring protocol includes those two parts, the meandering walk and the nested plots, and we view them as complementary. And as Pauline was talking about, like neither one gives you a complete picture, but together they help you understand better. So both of them require equal botanical skill. But the nested plots do require more time. And as Pauline said, we recommend the meandering walk is something that you could do annually, but you may choose to do the nested plots less frequently. And then within a site, your learning will be intensified as you monitor repeatedly over time. And again, circling back to Pauline's message about how we learn. So we learn both informally by getting out together in the field, talking about what we see, but also by formally collecting and analyzing these data. And we've created these great tools. We hope that they help us learn together as a community of practice. You know, tools that we can all use to learn how to do better reconstructions and help each other do better. And we invite you to join us. If enough people enter data, we have a better chance of fine-tuning our understanding, you know, because that will be based on the experience of the entire community of practice. If people are interested in fully participating in PRI using the database, you know, clearly the planting and management data are critical pieces. The focus of this webinar has been on the monitoring piece, but you can, you know, if monitoring is not something that you have the capacity for at this point, you can still keep track of those other details. And, you know, hopefully in the future, as Andy kind of said, if 5 years down the line, we have lots of information about different reconstructions out there, we could try to put together a concerted monitoring effort that would cover a lot of ground. So anyway, we're excited about where we are. And Pauline, do you have anything to add there?
I think you did a pretty good job. Again, that piece that when Amanda says if you're not going to, you don't feel that you can do actual monitoring, you can still enter data in that database. And I just want to reiterate that the management end of things, you know, it's easy to say, yeah, we burned or forget to put it in there, and then we lose an opportunity to burn or to learn. So it's really important contribution to make sure you keep up all of the management that you do, fire, burning, mowing, etc. And and then it will give us a lot of power to learn. And the monitoring on your site will give you a lot of power to learn even before we get this larger research effort going that will sample many sites.
Thanks. And, you know, we also wanted to make sure to thank the rest of the PRI advisory team and the working groups who worked on various parts of this, and of course, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who have over the years provided both funding and leadership support for our group. And with that, I think we're ready for some questions.
Everybody's ready to get outside and collect data. So I have a question. When you make your basically PVC plot structure, I am terrible at building things. You might have already said this, but are there instructions in the written version for how to build that nested plot frame?
Yeah, there is, and it gives you exact measurements. It gives you the exact sort of thing. If you're making them out of PVC, it tells you how long each piece needs to be and how to stick them together. You know, and when I say that, of course they fit into each other, but we found that a little rubber cement or something kind of holds them a little tighter but you can still pull them apart. So there's some tips and tricks in there about how to make them more easily useful in the field.
Nice. With this protocol, how many sites do you think you could do in a day? like assuming that they're relatively close together. I mean, I'm not asking you to like account for travel time. Like this train left the station from Pipestone and then arrived.
Well,
home.
As you know, Megan, it all depends. You know, that's the famous answer. It all depends, because part of it, you know, your planting site is going to be very different than mine, and it depends on how skilled you are. And you know, if your site is pretty homogeneous, it won't take as long than if you have a much more species-rich site where you have to be looking harder at more species. So it's a that depends kind of thing.
Right. And then Brian asked a question. Well, he has two questions. I'll ask you the first one. Are any soil cores being taken from these sites? Like with the veg sampling also?
No,
we
that's
don't
not.
have soils. Go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, I was just going to say, no, that's not part of what we're doing. So the soils information, where, as Andy showed, we're depending on, you know, it's not a precise thing. We're depending on the NRCS soils maps. And of course, those aren't necessarily perfect down to a particular point, but that seems like the best, most simplest way to get at least some information about the soil drainage characteristics of the site.
So Brian, I want to give you a little slightly different answer, and that is I'm the science coordinator for this group, and if you have some interest, and I can see where carbon could be a pretty interesting and important thing, that could we are thinking about how to engage additional science projects parallel with our work. No, we don't have that as a part of our protocol, but it doesn't mean it's not an important question. It doesn't mean that there could not be some kind of like grant or something to do some research to look at carbon storage. And then you asked, how are the results going to be disseminated? That's a question for the future, because at the moment, if you're doing monitoring, if people are doing monitoring on their own sites, they will be getting those data. They will be stored in the database, and then the idea is that we would want to be able to, once we get a critical mass of data, seek funding to do monitoring efforts across the kind of the database, in a way, across the suite of fields or participants that are part of the project, because then we can, if we had this kind of large monitoring event that was triggered after a certain amount of time, then we would really be able to start to learn what happened. You know, it's going to take a little bit of time. We need some young sites, we need some older sites, and of course, as our data progresses, the ones that we enter now as new plantings will end up being older plantings later. So then that's where there's a lot of learning that happens as time goes on. And they will be published, but this is, we're not quite that far down the road.
Pauline, I want to add to that too, that there's no reason why anybody using this protocol couldn't go above and beyond, right? So we've got some Minnesota DNR sites where we're going to add an insect monitoring component along with the veg monitoring component. And so that just means we're going to get even more data, stackables off of the same site, so that we can keep learning more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up.
So I have a question for Andy about you want data. I have a bunch of meandering walk data. If you would like it.
Send me a message.
Okay.
Thanks.
Andy, do you want to type your email into the chat just so everybody has your emails? Sometimes I feel like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service emails are like rare butterflies. Like really hard to find on the web.
Yep, good idea. I typed it in.
Thanks. And the same goes for Pauline and Amanda too, in case folks have questions for you after the webinar. And then it will be saved and recorded forever. All right, if we don't have any other questions, you know, that doesn't stop you from asking questions just because you don't have one right now. We're here to help and we're here to learn from each other and figure out how we can do this better. We appreciate your time today and just your attention and your energy. I know we had kind of a hard transition in the beginning, and I apologize to Pauline and Amanda because we tried to practice that so it'd be a little smoother, but there's no way to be like, we're happy, we're sad, we're happy again. Like it's just difficult. It's a hard week, so take care of yourselves, everybody. We appreciate the work you're doing for the Prairie, and we appreciate the partnership.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you, everybody.